still alive who were at 1975 when we gained independence. 2 weeks ago we had a National Parliament Day, and they were part of that moment. I want to acknowledge you once again. Dr. Momis is the constitutional architect of our country, if I could say it this way. Please, we just celebrated our Constitutional Day on the 15th of August last week. Let us acknowledge him in our midst. And I want to appreciate Mr. Bart Philman. He refused knighthood. For those who are chasing after knighthood, he is an example of someone who worked hard but refused knighthood. And so we want to appreciate your presence amongst us. An eminent son of our country in his own right, who has contributed immensely. I possibly will touch on his contribution in the early part of this millennium, in 2002, when he became treasurer. Some of the reset that took place for the next wave of economic growth we see started off under his watch, and I just want all of us to appreciate his presence amongst us, please. Of course, two of my peers, Don and Charles, good to have you in the midst. We have Minister Feo and Vice Minister Tonpi also up in the front. And for those who belong to the political group, the least favorite group in our country. But I want to say thank you to all of you from the academia and all stakeholders who are here. More importantly, our students. We want to say this is your moment. Conversations that are coming forth should be conversations that enrich you so that you can find your own path in life. Hopefully, in the conclusion of my speech, some examples that I will use could give you propeller, and that propellers should fan you on into your own life in your country. And I want to acknowledge the students amongst us, all eminent presenters after me and before me, those especially visiting from overseas, more so Australia. We want to say thank you for your presence. And lastly but not the least, a very important person in our room, representing the Australian government, His Excellency Ewan McDonald. Thank you very much for your presence. Without the Australian taxpayers, we would not have this building. And I want to say thank you to all Australian taxpayers. Thank you for continued generosity to Papua New Guinea since 1975. But in case all our cousins from Australia forget, PNG is the biggest investment destination of all Australian companies. So, and benefiting from the double taxation treaty, some of your taxes are paid also in Australia. So we're happy that you also do invest back in our country, but we don't take your investments for granted. Thank you, Ewan. You are certainly welcome to be amongst us. 50 years on, we are here now. And reflecting back on our 50 years, if I could quickly run through my speech. I'm not very good in reading prepared speech, so if you all don't mind, but for those who want to have a copy of my speech after I am done, I can ask Malum up front. 50 years on, we are here today. At 1975, many thought we would have been a failed nation. And amidst many fragilities and failures, we're still here as a robust democracy 50 years on. We're still here as a robust democracy 50 years on. And I qualify myself. Amidst many fragilities and many weaknesses that we carry, the fact of the matter is the prophets of doom at 1975, leading up to 1975 and after 75, to be reminded that PNG lives on. And I want to point to all of us. We're not just a nation birthed at 1975. At 1975 saw the fusion of 1,000 tribes into one sovereignty. Our ancestors lived, traversed, sailed, traded in our country, planted agriculture in our country for thousands of years. If you don't believe me, research UNESCO World Heritage Site. Cook is listed. Cook is enlisted as one of the first settled cultivated agricultural site on the face of planet Earth. Mesopotamia and Cook run par in as far as the length of settled practiced agriculture. Cook is not a Pangupatic established site. Cook is UNESCO World Heritage Site up in Western Highlands. 10,000 years ago, when the rest of planet Earth were hunting and gathering, we were already settled in agriculture in our country. Clap to that. If you don't believe me, go to the New Zealand Maoris and you will see the Lapita tapestry poetry. The tapestry of the Lapita poetry depicts ancient trade and people moving in our part of the world. From Melanesia to Polynesia, there were a tapestry that related that we coexisted. From Manus, New Ireland, East New Britain, Solomon Islands, Bougainville, Solomon Islands, and right through rest of Melanesia and through Polynesia. The Maori people still have the same history of the Lapita poetry we have today. The children that came in this morning, they sang not the ordinary Motu song. They sang an ancient Hiri trade song, a trade that was going on in this part of the world, and I do acknowledge the Motu amongst us. Thank you very much for giving your land to be the seat of government and seat of missionaries since 1884. They were trading here to the Gulf and to this part of our country. Trading was going on. In case you do not know, the kina was not invented at 1975. The kina was a trading currency in the ancient world. How do you think a big man in the Melpa Mountains, a big man in the Holy Mountains would be able to marry 2 and 3 wives in the ancient of time with the kina cell? Do they produce kina cell in the mountains? Dr. Webster, you know, you and me up in Hagen at the Melpa territory don't have seas up there. It was traded. Our cousins in Gulf of Papua were able to trade up, or from the Sipiks, or from the Medengs, were able to trade between. And so, in the ancient of our country, there were activity going on. The most diverse nation on the face of planet Earth were fused into one sovereignty at 1975. We have not arrived yesterday. We were here timeless, and we will be here forever still until Jesus comes. So for those who adopted us in 1975, you have to look to the father of our country sitting here. He saw this country into existence. Yes, they were in the early 70s. The Tolais in the Matugan Association were thinking hard and loud about who we are, where we've come from, what is missionaries doing here, what is government doing here, what can we do? The Tolais were advocating on sovereignty. The Bougainvilleans, even before 1975, September 16, at September 1, 1975, in case you do not know, they had unilateral declaration of independence prior to September 16, 1975. And of course, the rest of the country, Papua and Besana, the southern side, it was a huge contest, tribalized, setting feuds into one sovereignty. My generation and generation after me must forever appreciate the greatest generation, the Somare, Momis, Chain, Luz, Mauri Kiki, John Guys, Cecil Abel. That generation created something that no other Papua New Guinea innovation can ever do time into the future. Say thank you to them. Say thank you to them. Don't bask in the negativities that hold us down, thinking negative and pessimist all the time. Don't take your democracy for granted. Don't think that just because we lowered a flag at 1975 and not tore it down, it wasn't a struggle. There were struggles in our country. In the 60s, and I was privileged to have worked and heard from two of the fathers of our country, St. Julius and Somare. St. Julius endorsed me in 2002. Somare picked me up in 2007. And I quote from Somare. Somare would tell us that there were days when there were signposts in Elabits that said, no natives and no dogs. Did you get this? There were signposts that said, no natives and no dog in Elabits Hotel. So young children of Papua New Guinea, my generation and generation that is coming after me, listening right now, as you listen about your country, don't get bogged down in the naysayers and pessimist worldview. There were optimists at 1975, and there must be class of optimists today at 2025 for your country. Is that all right? There were political parties formed in the 70s to defer independence. I put to you, do your research. I may be wrong. There were political parties formed in the 1970s to defer independence. In the mountains where I come from, my member then was a strong advocate of trying to have a balanced view, and the question was planted into his mind. Is we independent ready in 1975? And some of his others were telling him we're not independent ready. The late Sir Matabe, one of the compatriots of Dr. Mamis, one of the constitutional fathers who were part of those who crafted our constitution, they said it's okay. But listen to the compelling voice of the Somali generation and fuse our diversity into one country. In case you think that this country is not worth celebrating in September 16, I want to say, just because blood was not shed doesn't mean they won't struggle. There were actual contests for independence, and the thought of fusing our country into one sovereignty override the other competing views that were on the table before 1975. Celebrate your democracies. Other parts of Melanesia don't have democracy as you have today. Celebrate your democracy. And I want to say today, as we look at our 50th, the journey has not been easy too. The constitution that bettered our country has also provisions of freedom that is sometimes used and sometimes abused. I want to put to you, as you do your research, from 1975 to 2008, we grew the smallest in as far as our economy is concerned. These years were years where our foundation was still shaky. 1975 independence, 1977 first national general election, 1978-79 first attempt on VONC, 1980 first successful VONC. Chain comes in as our nation's second prime minister. 1982, Marape comes back in as our country's prime minister again after the second general elections. 1985, Wingti comes in as our country's third prime minister. Wingti famously spoke in Parliament in 2015 that he was busy managing politics and not managing country in the years he was prime minister. 1987, 85 to 87, he's preparing for elections. He comes back. 1988, he goes out, and Rabin Amaliu comes in as prime minister. 1992, Wingti comes back in as prime minister. 1994, for self-preservation, he resigns and gets himself re-elected on the same day. 6 months later, court found that conduct to be unlawful. He went out. Chain comes in 1995. Of course, we all know the 1997 Sandline crisis, 1997 saga. And then elections, Skate comes in. Skate goes out in 1999. Mekere comes in. All of us here at the university, students, I wasn't a student at the time, student was saying, Mekere is selling the country, get him out of office. At this university produced some of the loudest critics of Mekere. Yet 20 years later when he died, we praised Mekere as the greatest reformist prime minister. What paradox of land we are living in. What paradox. He served only 2 years. Sometimes I look back and I wish Mekere had 10 years. Somebody had 10 years in the early years. St. Julius had another 10 years in the early years. I want to come back to this point. I'm quoting and I'm all over the place a little bit. I'll come to the conclusion very soon. This book, I'm reading from NRI, it's not from James Marape or Pangupati, again from NRI. I have to qualify myself because, Professor Howard, you know this book, you can expand on this later on. They wrote a review with ANU and all our eminent scholars, a review 1975 to 2008. 1975 to 2008. And amongst many findings, they affirmed everything we know about, and they, in fact, they went more deeper. One key readings, and I'm going to read from this volume I have here. And I want to thank them, NRI and ANU, for your work in running from 1975 to 2024, 2025. They've released their latest findings. Please, don't read those Facebook commentaries that is not substance. Read this sort of thing that is substantial and will educate and edify you. All right? I'll give you an example. There was a, without mentioning his name, a pro-vice chancellor from Unitec. He came to Marape Barracks in the protest group that came in the USDCA. The USDCA we signed, and eventually after hearing the briefing from our Foreign Secretary, States Hall, and Secretary Akipe, he said, "Oh, now I'm enlightened." And I asked him, how comes you were not enlightened? Where did you get your source of information? He said, "I was reading Facebook." My goodness. Pro-Vice Chancellor Unitec reading Facebook and believing Facebook and not checking credible sources. Not checking credible sources. I encourage students, don't run to Facebook. It's a 2-minute noodles to spoil your mind. Just go straight to substantial writings that are written by good people. Anyway, go back to our main gist of our conversation. They found the NRI monograph that came out in 2008 found that from 1975 to 2008, our average economic growth was 0.3%. That's not James Marape statistics. This is credible people. 0.3%. I put to you, our population has been growing about 3%. Our population has been growing about 3%. Our economy from 1975 to 2008, 0.3%. And I want to put to you a thesis. You do your study. You correlate that phase in our nation's life and the 13 times we had formed government by then. 13 times we had formed government. There was no policy maturity on any government of the day to progress, actual translate policy to progress of our people. I want to run through you quickly as part of the review and from my own mind. 1975 independence. First bill that was passed. Dr. Momis, one of the key architects of our decentralization, passed the provincial government system. Law created. First amendment in our constitution possibly was that amendment to create the provincial government systems. That's 1976, 77, thereabout, 76. Just 20 years later, in 1995, just because our Prime Minister is not happy with the Premier, we just threw the entire provincial government system to the rubbish bin, and we created the new provincial government system that has compounded more problems than fixing the problems we were carrying into our system. So only 20 years on, the old provincial government system thrown into rubbish bin, and a new hybrid comes in. That just doesn't do much except reinventing the wheel. The only poor people thrown out was those labeled Premier, and converting the regional member to governor, and you had one person occupying 2 offices in that structure. That's 95. First law changed. Apart from the VUNCs that took place, what else happened in between? Panguna miners running, supporting us. We had Octady coming in 1984. We had Pogra and Heights and all this coming in 1988, 89. What happened in 1988? To those who are my generation, what happened in 1988? Dr. Midna, you're a policeman, deputy commissioner. You should know this. Your country sent policemen to Bougainville, and a law and order that was brewing with lack of intelligence. And intelligence data came into our country as early as the late 1970s on the cry of people to ask for 2% or a little bit more in terms of their entitlement from the environment and from what is the just due. But we were busy changing governments like our underwears in the early years of our life. And no one attended to a sensitive matter that was coming in right into government policy. At 78, 77, 79, Somare was there. At 80, when Sir Julius comes in, he may have wanted to do some things, but he's gone out in 82. Somare comes back in, he may have wanted to do some things, he's gone out at 85. Pai Swingti may have wanted to do something, he's preparing for 87 election. 88, he comes in, he wants to do something. But the towers went down, he goes out, Robin Amalu comes in, and so we carry on. Today, 40 years on, we live with the legacy